All right, for our first guest of the morning, I read he does an excellent Substack, does Chris Trotter, and his second to last, his penultimate one, not his latest one, but his second latest one, was on, was it last week's security briefing from the SIS. Whilst in Australia, the OSIS, or whatever it's called, has kicked out the Iranian ambassador because they say they were interfering and basically helping to facilitate anti-Semitic attacks in Australia. It doesn't seem that the focus of our security intelligence service is quite the same. In fact, it seems as nothing much has changed since that remarkable conference where Rebecca Kitteridge told us that if you braided your kids' hair or were on Pinterest, you might be a Nazi and your family should dob you in. Has anything changed since then? Chris Trotter, what do you reckon? Are they still woke as?
Well, one of the people who commented on my Substack post suggested that all this PR nonsense from the SIS, which they are clearly obliged to go through at the behest of, well, certainly the last government, but also apparently this one, should not be taken all that seriously. That obviously they will be focusing on the real threats. It's just that they can't admit that they are because they would get into all kinds of trouble with all kinds of politicians and bureaucrats. And
but they wouldn't these days, would they?
Oh, I think they would. You see, the problem, Sean, and this is what the Post is really all about, is that certainly my understanding of what the SIS is there to do and the current official mission of the SIS are very different. I grew up when the SIS lived in the shadows. You had to work pretty hard to find out who the director was, and he was certainly never, ever interviewed on public radio, right?
Yeah.
And the purpose of the SIS was to defend the New Zealand state against enemies, foreign and domestic. And the real emphasis was, in those days, on the domestic side, because, of course, you and I grew up during the Cold War, and most people understood that there was a genuine threat from the Soviet Union and its allied countries. And there were indeed groups in New Zealand whose ideology was broadly comparable to that of the Soviet government, and who made no secret of the fact that they wanted to establish a communist regime in New Zealand. And the SIS, unsurprisingly, kept a very close watch on such people. Now, the Soviet Union is long gone. The People's Republic of China is outperforming the capitalists. And so that threat seems to have rather faded away. But there are three threats that I think an internal security service should be looking at. The first is ethno-nationalism, Maori ethno-nationalism, and that's because in the last couple of years, we've heard Maori leaders and Maori activists openly threaten massive civil disturbance rising to civil war. Now, if keeping an eye on people who are threatening civil war and unmandated constitutional change aren't a fit subject for our security intelligence service, then I don't know what is. The second is Islamism, which is still a massive threat worldwide, and which is still, in countries like France in particular, killing a lot of people. And in places like Africa, in Nigeria, for example, I mean, thousands of people are dying every year at the hands of Islamist groups like Boko Haram. So the idea that Islamism, because we had...
Heads up to a whole lot of people. October 7th, 2023 were killed and kidnapped in Israel by Islamic extremists too.
Well, yes, and that was the next step I was going to take us on was, so there's Islamism, but then more particularly there's what, writers around the world now are calling Palestinianism. This is effectively the global movement now backing the terrorist activities of Hamas and the propaganda efforts of Hamas worldwide. And you see tens of thousands of people on the street attacking Israel, promoting the Palestinian cause, all very well and good. This is a democratic country. They are free to do that. But the problem is, as you alluded to, Sean, it spills over into vicious anti-Semitic
and
activity.
indeed, in Australia, it appears that it was organised by a foreign state, a couple of incidents.
That's right, the Revolutionary Guard of the Islamic Republic of Iran. And so these three things strike me as clear and present dangers to the New Zealand state, to the constitutional order.
Were any of them mentioned in that briefing?
About the only one that got a passing reference was the threat of Islamic extremism around the world.
Yeah.
Ever since the Christchurch mosque massacres, and given the perfectly understandable traumatizing of New Zealand's Muslim community, and given the way the government led by Jacinda Ardern responded, and the way the New Zealand people responded with this huge outpouring of solidarity, you will recall the meetings that were held, or the gatherings in sports arenas, thousands of people. Basically, that put the Muslim community in New Zealand off limits in a security sense. I mean, if it was discovered that, major surveillance effort was underway in New Zealand by the SIS vis-a-vis the Muslim community, all hell would break loose. And the same has to be said, Sean, if it became known that the SIS was spying on Maori activists. Now, it's done this in the past.
First one, Maori ethno-nationalism. The Te Pāti Maori candidate was at a meeting, and I've seen this on social media, with a South African flag on it and wearing a cap, and she is emulating people who say kill the farmers. Yes.
Well, I mean, it's important for us not to forget, right?
Yeah.
40 years ago, the SIS was paying a lot of attention to Maori nationalist groups. This was understandable since some of the leading Maori nationalists had been trained in Libya and Cuba. I mean, let's not forget these things. People made comments about blowing up power pylons. And in those days, that sort of talk, earned you clicks on your phone, right? But if that was done today, I suspect there would be a claim to the Waitangi Tribunal. There would be all kinds of outrage carried in the news media. Academics would step forward to condemn this as neo-colonialism of the worst kind. And so, at least publicly, the SIS just turns a blind eye. It's just too politically sensitive. And from my perspective, a national security agency cannot afford to be too politically sensitive if it's to do its job.
Chris, I think what you're saying is true and bloody stunning when you put it the way you have put it, and a lot of people are reacting in the same way. I guess my vain hope is this is all a psyop, and we still have the faceless smileys and the men with brown shoes keeping an eye on these buggers, and all this woke rubbish about tolerant post-colonial spying, that's just all a psyop smokescreen. But I suspect it's not.
Yeah, well,